Hi friends, welcome to my channel. My name's Fiddle. Today will be the last episode for the medical device series and we'll be making the bone saw. I ended up making this piece a few times, one to make sure I got it in the right size, and two, I really wanted it to function, but in the end I was only able to make it to where you can turn the crank. As always, don't forget to check the link in the description. That would take you to the scavenger hunt where you can find the list of materials so you can make this bone saw along with me. Okay, are you ready? Let's go. Okay, we're going to start with making the big wheel inside of the saw first. For this you'll need a small metal gear and something that we can pour resin over it in. I'm using a piece of plastic from packaging. You just want to make sure that it's almost the same size as the gear. If you don't want to use resin, a button would be a good substitute. This is what mine came out looking like. It was a little thick on one side, so I ended up sanding it down and then putting a little bit of a top coat on. Next, we need to drill a hole through the center so we can insert the crank arm later. Next, we're going to need a strip of flat baking pan aluminum. I'm using just the rim and cutting off the rolled over edge. Take your time and go slow. You don't want to do any quick motions with this because you can cut yourself pretty easily with it. Now that we've got our long bit of metal, we need to make it to where the sides aren't sharp anymore. Using a popsicle stick, lay it over top of your aluminum and using some sort of tool, rub along the edge of it until it curls up. I'm using a thinner, smaller piece of wood, but it'll do the same thing as a popsicle stick. Repeat the process on both sides. Then if you need to, use a larger ball tool to completely flatten it out and make sure there's no sharp edges. When it's completely folded up and ready to go, it'll be about 3/16 of an inch wide. Okay, now that we have our metal piece ready, we need to bend it into shape. Basically, we want it to be a pointed horseshoe or maybe even a staple type shape. To make sure that you have the right width up top, use the gear that we made earlier to make sure it fits inside. Next, we need to use a pokey tool to poke holes where we need to insert the jewelry head pins for the handle, the crank, and for the bottom wheel. For the crank and bottom wheel, it's a lot easier to have your piece folded in half and go straight through both sides so your holes are lined up. Now we're ready to start making the handle. There are two different ways you can do this and I'll talk about both. The first one being you take a flathead jewelry pin and poke it through the top hole and then twist it and shape it into a handle. This is the way I would rather have done it, but I did it the other way where you make the handle shape, poke it through the hole, and then add a bead on the other end to hold it in place. The shape of the handle kind of reminds me of an old turnkey from like a can of Spam or something. Once I had the shape made, I poked it through the hole and added the bead on the other end. I used a mixture of E6000 and super glue to hold everything together. Once it was completely dry, I did end up taking that bead off. It just took up too much room inside of the saw. And next, because of my strange way of doing things, we're going to add the bottom gear on next. This piece might be a little harder for you to find. I do believe this is a gear from a printer, but it is extra tiny. It had a little bit of a pokey piece on one side, but I cut it off with my knife. To attach this gear, first we need to take our jewelry head pin, poke it through one of the bottom holes that we made. Then put the gear on and push the pin all the way through the other side. For now, leave it like that and we're going to go ahead and put the big gear on. Slide the gear in place, then use the jewelry pin to find the hole and slide it all the way through. This is what mine's looking like so far. I did add on a small seed bead to the other side of the bottom gear. Now we can glue that in place and cut off the excess of the aluminum wire and from the bottom gear. We want to leave the post for the top gear long because we need to bend it into shape. But before I do that, because my bottom gear is this bright blue and it really stands out, I painted over it with a metallic paint marker. Okay, now we're ready to do the crank arm. While holding the pin in place, use your finger to bend it to where it is as close as you can get to the aluminum. Then using a pair of pliers just about at the edge of the wheel, bend the head pin straight up. Then leaving enough room for a small bead, trim the excess off. Use a bit of E6000 and glue the bead in place. If your post was a little bit too long, you can always trim it down to where it meets flush with the bead. And the last thing we need to do is add the chain. This is one of those ball chains. This originally came from a necklace. If you don't have a chain like this, you can use a small jewelry chain and that will work just fine. Starting at the top wheel inside where you can barely see, work your way around until you come back all the way up at the top and stick your two ends together. Cut off any excess and hold it all together with E6000 and super glue. And with that, it brings us to the end of our tutorial. I hope this gives you ideas for your next project or you join along in making it with me. If you're new, I'm glad you're here. Please don't forget to click the subscribe, like, comment thing stuff. Buttons. Words are hard. Next tutorial, we will be making a prosthetic leg. Thank you, Ginger, and I'll see you next time.